healer and counselor because I went to him for counseling during a very difficult time in my life. So I'm really excited about what he has to say today. His life and his work and personal life have been informed primarily by shamanic and Buddhist views and practices. Following a close brush with death in 2017, he has felt led to investigate the wisdom teachings of Christianity, both ancient and modern, which until recently have been restricted to monastic circles. Really excited about hearing the teachings of Jim Nourse, who's speaking about communing with sources of sacred wisdom.
Thank you, Sharon, Stephen, and thank all of you that have shared today for your incredible wisdom. I feel very enriched having just partaken of all that's been spoken. So thank you so much.
Me too.
I wanted to also say that the title or the name Jim Nourse, it should be Jim and Judith Nourse, because Judith is equally a part of this journey that we'll be talking about. In fact, maybe even more than half, because if it weren't for her and her expertise and devotion, we wouldn't be having this presentation, or at least I would not be part of it. I just wanted to make one comment stemming from Stephen Haslam's talk today from the Gospel of Thomas. The second logion of this Gnostic gospel says, Yeshua says, if you are searching, you must not stop until you find. When you find, however, you will become troubled. Your confusion will give way to wonder. In wonder, you will reign over all things. Your sovereignty will be your rest. Particularly this line, when you find, you will be troubled. I think that's how it works. And that period of being troubled can go on for a long time, as Stephen mentioned. Back in early 2017, I had been hearing a little voice in my head that was saying, take a sabbatical. And I thought that it was negotiable. I took the voice seriously, figured it was some part of me communicating an important idea to me, and I thought, well, I will maybe start taking a week off every quarter, take a sabbatical. Well, okay, I will, in addition to that, I will only work 4 days a week, take a sabbatical. This seemed to be non-negotiable. And then one early afternoon in January, I was shoveling snow out in our driveway after a big snowstorm, and I fell, hit my head, and lost consciousness. And I was taken to the hospital and diagnosed with a concussion, and was released. Everything looked fine. They did CT scans of the brain, and I now have proof that there is a brain in here. So we just sort of put that behind us. And then 2 months later, I started noticing some strange phenomena. Everything I picked up with my right hand seemed heavier than it should have been. And I was running into door frames as I walked through the door. And the doctor that I work with in the same office had an emergency CT scan run, and it showed a large subdural hematoma. Apparently, after the accident, the concussion, a slow bleed was begun, and it didn't fully manifest my brain was basically being pushed over to the right side. And so I had emergency surgery that night to drain the subdural hematoma. And Judith is going to describe the rest of the sequence in that process.
This was a Wednesday night, and by Friday he had healed so quickly and had gotten use of his right arm and right leg back. He could speak normally. Everything was fine. And they said, we're going to discharge you tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. You're doing great. So Saturday morning came and I'm there. We were waiting. He had 2 drain tubes hanging from his head. And we were waiting for the doctor or the PA to come in and pull those drain tubes so he could go home. Well, it was the PA who came in, and she pulled the drain tubes, and immediately, she pulled them one after another, and immediately Jim put his hands to the back of his head, and he looked at me. She was on the other side. He looked at me and he said, Judith, I'm getting a really bad headache. So I looked up at her. She looked like she was in a trance. She was just tranced out, staring straight ahead, gathered up all of her supplies, pulled the pillow out from behind him, which was full of bright red blood, and set it on the sink on the way out the door and left. Meanwhile, Jim is saying to me, Judith, I really need pain medication. This is awful. And then the next thing I know, he is holding his head like this and thrashing around on the bed and screaming out in pain. There were 2 nurses standing outside the door of the room, and they were looking in, and I said, please come in and help. They would not come in. They said, his nurse is down the hall with another patient. She'll be here soon. Well, we waited and waited, and I went out again. Finally went down the hall looking for her, and she was at that point in the med room drawing up some pain medication in her syringe. And she came in, and he was thrashing like crazy. She came in, asked me to hold him still so she could give him this medication in an IV, and he immediately dropped off he was unconscious and had a seizure. And she said, is he allergic to this medication? And I said, no, he's bleeding. Look at the pillow. So she saw the pillow and immediately realized that he was hemorrhaging. So there began just a horrendous series of errors trying to get him, and I won't go into all those details, but trying to get him to the elevator to the OR to open him up again. Just some pretty awful things happened, and I was with him. I'm a nurse. I know what happened. A lot of it did not get into the notes, the nursing notes. Anyway, Jim went to surgery. When he came out of surgery, he was on a ventilator. He was unconscious, and he was on a ventilator. The doctor told me that he was not breathing adequately and that he didn't know if he was going to wake up. And if he did wake up, what abilities he would have. He had no idea. So John and Carolyn Myers were there with me at that point, and I had called Al and Susan Miner. Some of you know them or know of them, the Lama Singh readings, and they had become very good friends of ours. So I called them and just asked their whole group to pray. I called the fellowship and asked for prayers. John Myers, who has been doing shamanic journeying longer than we have, many, many years, went home and did a shamanic journey to look for Jim. He was unconscious. And came back and said to me, Judith, I could see him, but there was a black wall that was dividing my space where I was from him, and I couldn't get to him. Al Miner called me, and he had immediately gone into his non-ordinary state, and he came back. What happened was he could see Jim, and that Jim was in a circle in conference with others. He assumed his guides and teachers and so on. He could see him, but he couldn't get to him, and he heard this loud voice said that he had never heard before that said, "Do not approach." So Al came back, and he was told Jim had to stay in consultation. He was making decisions about whether he was going to come back or not. So Al said to me, this is very important. You have to tell people and do this yourself. Do not try to convince Jim to come back. He has to make this decision for himself. Please tell people only to send him love heart to heart. And that's what we did. Just sending him love heart to heart. And we didn't know what would happen, but two days later, Jim did start to regain consciousness. And but he could not move his right side, and of course he couldn't speak, and he had the tube down his throat for the ventilator. So anyway, once he woke up, it was, we our friends were kind of excited because he seemed to, he knew who we were, he knew what was going on, and we were excited, and we thought, well, gee, maybe he had a near-death experience and he's going to tell us all about this. Anyway, he was hospitalized for 2 weeks and very slowly began to speak, could not walk. After 2 weeks, was discharged to a rehab hospital for another 2 weeks. And he couldn't remember, when he was able to speak, he could not remember anything that had happened, except that he had seen a red flower with a gold center. That's all he could remember of that time that he was unconscious. I'm going to turn it over to Jim right now. Go ahead. Why don't you go ahead from this point?
Yeah.
So you're in the hospital,
yeah,
the rehab hospital.
Well, the interesting thing about that was that when I did regain consciousness, I was in a state of bliss. Something that was very completely counterintuitive. I was very much aware that I was paralyzed on the right side, couldn't talk, couldn't move. And yet I was in this extraordinary state of consciousness that seemed to accept this whole configuration as something that was necessary and was unfolding exactly as it should. And that state of consciousness went on most of the time for about 5 weeks. And as part of that, I would awaken, this was in rehab, I would awaken between 1 and 3 in the morning with a feeling that there was a presence in the room. And it was very definite. It was like that feeling you get when somebody is looking at you, except this was not creepy like that. It was just, there was somebody, some entity in the room. And Judith had recommended, when I told her about this, she said, why don't you do active imagination? And I had done lots of what Carl Jung called active imagination in the course of my analysis, my personal analysis. This is where you typically, the way Jung treated it, is that you would take a character or several characters from a dream that you wanted to know more about and enter into a conscious dialogue with them. And generally this was done in writing. It feels a little bit like you're writing a script of a play, 2 parts, 2 characters in the play. But after a short time, if you continue this writing, it takes on a life of its own, so that what the other character begins to say will really surprise you. And it feels like it's coming from a non-ego source when that happens. So I did an active imagination the next time it happened with this presence. And I said, "Who are you?" And waited for a reply. And the reply was, "Yeshua." And that startled me a bit. I said, "Are you Yeshua ben Yosef? Or are you a part of me? Or are you a figment of my imagination?" And the answer that came back was, "Yes." And I've had about over 500 of those conversations since then, which are preceded by a few minutes of yoga and usually about an hour of meditation. And then I will take my trusty iPhone and the Pages app and begin to talk with the presence, which most of the time is Yeshua. But another time, another entity came through, or another part of me, or another figment of my imagination that refers to itself as Shu Qi. And he is a very tricky, confrontive, humorous kind of character who kicks my butt up and down the block and confronts me with my stuff. Yeshua is much more gentle. Judith, after getting my agreement to do this, shared it with a very limited number of folks who all had a very positive response to it. I felt very awkward about this and very hesitant to share it with anyone, because I don't want people to think, "Hey, Nourse, he thinks he's channeling Jesus." That's not what I think. I think I'm doing active imagination, and something is coming through as a result of that. And finally, I realized after one particular conversation with Yeshua, I was told that do consider carefully who you share these conversations with, but it's not just about that. It's about, if you're overly careful about that, could you be withholding stuff from people who might really benefit from hearing what we are talking about? So I went through with that.
So the other thing is that Yeshua has said on a number of different occasions that there are a lot of people right now on the earth who are receiving such information, that Jim is not the only one, and that things are really changing in the earth, which I think everyone here knows. But even though it looks like the worst, it's worse now than it's ever been before, that this is part of the old and what has happened in the earth, because the original intent for the earth had been and has been forgotten, but that things truly are changing, and that this is part of that. Also that, that we do have a responsibility to share this information with people who are interested. We now have a conversations group that meets twice a month, and Jim and I choose something, whether it's a Shu Qi adventure or a Yeshua conversation, that we go through for 90 minutes with this group and get incredible input from it. The dilemma that we had after Jim started to heal and was discharged home was, what do we do about this and what happened in the hospital so that others don't have the same kind of experience? And the first thing that we did was we actually scheduled 2 meetings with administration, including the chief executive nurse of nursing and so on, to go over the details. And they wanted to hear them, of course, because they wanted to know what I knew and what I remembered. But then they did nothing. They took no blame for it, and they did nothing. And it was a real dilemma for us. What do we do at this point with it? Do we take this to a lawyer? And we had actually consulted with a few lawyers. And I want to read to you how the wisdom of this entity, Yeshua, has this was like one of the first times that we started to realize the quality of the wisdom. Jim asked this question, and by the way, what he does is he writes his questions and then he waits and then he writes the response. And I thought he was hearing the response, but he says, no.
It's like the response just kind of flows through my fingers onto the keyboard.
Yeah.
I don't hear it at first.
Okay. So Jim wrote, what light can you cast on the errors and what I can't avoid calling a cover-up during the critical days of my hospitalization? Yeshua replied, nothing is as it seems in the realm called earth. There are always forces at work and play behind the manifest occurrences that comprise the reality that underlies the illusions and dramas. As one who desires to know the truth and act from the foundation it provides, your task becomes different from that of one simply seeking to right a wrong or settle a score. Not that scales do not sometimes require balancing, yet is this done in a way that ensures that balance and invites the turning of error into blessing, or in a manner that creates ill will, undermining of a belief in one's abilities and callings, and so on. The former breeds sober self-reflection and correction. The latter, self-reproach, self-doubt, and perpetuates imbalance and disharmony. Let us consider the following to be true. The PA did not act in malice toward you. The nurses who patronized Judith did not do so with the intent to do harm. No one involved in the situation willfully set out to worsen your life circumstances. In fact, the opposite was the case, seen from here. The guides of the PA, with the consent of her high self, as you call spirit, volunteered for the role her middle self enacted. But let us be clear, this does not reduce the matter to one of a simple karmic contract between you and her. The higher worlds orchestrate relationships and events and such in complex confluences. Just as in your practice of the ancient needles, you seek a single point that might serve multiple functions and therefore address a number of the patient's concerns in one action, events in the earth may similarly address a confluence of concerns not readily obvious to the ordinary awareness. All involved in this matter are involved in it by choice and have played roles that serve multiple determinants. As to the matter of monetary compensation, then what constitutes right action? If the outcome thus far says that you have stepped onto a new spiritual footing and that there were contracts among several of you to provide each other with experiences, to provide opportunities for growth, and so on, isn't it better just to forgive and forget? But is it? How do you know if such seemingly enlightened release of the matter isn't a backing out of your part of the contract? This is not just a rhetorical question. How do you know? And what he said after some more, I'm just going to skip some of it. He said, your union with the divine in doing this, in going ahead with this, is what you, he said, I say you shall know and you shall act accordingly, because you shall first seek union with the highest, and your actions will flow from that source. Well, this really spoke to both of us and friends, that this was a source of high wisdom, and we felt so blessed by such wisdom. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to follow that up, see if I can make screen share operate.
We're going to give you some samples of these conversations.
Okay, what are you all seeing now?
There. Got it?
That looks like the
I'm
fire
seeing
gazing
the
prophecy.
She's
Fire
got it.
Gazing Prophecy. Okay, good.
prophecy. Mhm.
That's correct. Okay, yeah, this is a sample of some conversations, one with Yeshua and one with Shu Chi, that have happened fairly recently.
And this one is Shu Chi.
This one is Shu Chi, and it's interesting. For a long time, these dialogues were mostly that, just verbal dialogues. But what began happening after a while was I began seeing scenes mentally in which this dialogue was taking place. Could have been on rivers or mountains and so forth. So this unfolds more like a story than a simple back and forth. And honestly, in this first part, it had been a cool and rainy day for 3 days straight. I don't know. I don't remember whether that was true here or in the scene that emerged for me as I was writing this. But in any case, it had been cool and rainy for 3 days straight. Everything that could absorb moisture was damp. It had not been altogether unpleasant, as such times seemed to foster contemplation, perhaps because the world seems to be in perpetual twilight, and the sounds of the rain on the roof and sod evoke calmness. I had arisen at a late hour of the morning and donned clothing that was a bit clammy. The discomfort was made bearable by knowing a fire would soon dry things out. I lumbered out into the main room and with a bit of a start saw that someone was sitting there in front of a fire that had already been built. "Ho," he greeted me. It was Shu Chi, all comfortable, smoking his pipe and gazing into the flames. "Ho yourself," I replied. "You know, there are rumored to be folks in these parts who can read fires," he noted, as if his presence in my house unannounced was not really worthy of conversation. "Well, Master Shu, if I were to find such a person, I would ask that they look into their fire and tell me what Shu Chi is up to in letting himself into my house." "Yes, you probably would. Waste an opportunity to look into the future when you could just ask me." Oh, all right. What are you doing here? I should point out that this little joust was not serious. We both knew his appearance and the strangeness of our encounters were how our relationship works. I was initially irritated or otherwise disturbed by this, but by now had grown accustomed to it, even welcoming it in a way. Well, for one thing, I'm giving you a warm, dry space to start your day in. Now, that's right considerate of me, isn't it? Yes, it certainly is, and thank you for that. And something tells me that there's something else. Yes, I'm here to tell you to gather up a few belongings and some food and water and such and get out of here immediately, because one of those fire gazers, one I happen to trust, tells me that a flaming boulder will fall from the sky today and lay waste to this place. I had not expected this. I said, you mean this place in particular? No, not necessarily this place, your place, but maybe a wide area. And she said this, not everybody who knows something is male, you know. Thanks for the correction. You believe this? He shrugged his shoulders. You want to chance it? Something didn't add up. If you really thought this was such an emergency, why didn't you wake me earlier, light a fire under me instead of in the fireplace? Well, that kind of rushing around with the mind all agitated is usually not a good way to deal with a problem. I figured some action would be necessary, but that it would be obvious when, and things would fall into place. I'd say that's been a pretty good approach so far. I'm relaxed. You're befuddled but not nervous. Your pants are dry. And in a few minutes, we should be able to fill a couple of packs and head for the hills. As he spoke, he was beginning to load things into his pack. I began to follow suit. He was right. I was befuddled, but not particularly nervous. What at first looked like a contradiction in terms of his lack of urgency while under a meteor alert, was his ability to, as he so often put it, be in Tao. I decided to ask him about this. Master Shu, is your calmness right now in the face of a possible pending disaster due to your being in Tao? One should never be hasty to claim such a thing. The long practice of acceptance, of allowing the world to be as it is without trying to make it fit my expectations. This creates an inner state of emptiness. When I have emptied myself of my delusions, then Tao lives through me. Tao knows when this rock will hit, and when we need to leave, and so on. You said we needed to leave immediately. Oh, that was for effect. But I do believe the right moment is approaching. Shu Qi continued. You know, being in Tao in this instance could mean getting killed by this thing. That could be our destiny. Everyone dies, and this may be our deaths. To be in Tao is to be at peace with whatever is happening. This discourse was taking a turn I didn't particularly like, but I couldn't refute it. But being befuddled, I did have a question about this. Did this fire gazer give any specifics on where this thing is going to hit? Actually, no, just somewhere in this general area. So where do you have in mind going? Somewhere outside this general area. My attention was suddenly seized by a high-pitched whistling sound seeming to come from all directions at once. It was growing louder by the second and was now ear-splitting in its intensity. There was a sudden bang directly overhead as something tore through the roof and with another bang buried itself in the floor, leaving a smoking trail. There was a small smoking crater where it had landed. Figuring it would be extremely hot if it had not been reduced to powder by its fall, I reached into the hole with a spoon and drew out a smoking piece of gravel about the size of an olive. Shu Chi had fallen to the floor in spasms of laughter. I fell to the floor myself, though not in laughter. This thing had landed about a big toe's length from my left big toe. I started to say, "This isn't funny," but I wasn't sure of that, and for some reason started to think hard about whether it was funny or not, and that struck me as hilarious. We were both rolling on the floor and holding our sides. This went on for some time until I noticed that now, because this object had left a hole in the roof, rainwater was now dripping in my ear. This threw us both once again into paroxysms of laughter. As these things go, eventually we stopped laughing and I got up and placed a bucket under the leak. The drip was slowing, and through the window I could see patches of blue sky. The rain was moving out. "Well," I asked him, "were we in Tao?" "As soon as we answered that question one way or the other," he said, "we have lied." I looked at him quizzically, and then for no reason I can offer, that look dissolved as all the muscles in my face relaxed into a smile. "Yep," he said, "you're getting the hang of it." With that, he touched his forehead and waved his hand in a gesture of departing. I nodded in response. On his way out, he emptied his pack on the table, except for an apple, which he polished on his shirt and proceeded to bite into as he walked out the front door. I continued to sit on the floor, shaking my head and smiling. What do you do next in a day that starts like this? Wait and see, I could barely hear him say from down the road. So that's Master Shu.
And I just want to comment that we used that with the discussion group just a few weeks ago. It was absolutely amazing what people saw in terms of symbolism in that we hadn't even noticed. So here is that night after we had this discussion with the group, Jim had a conversation with Yeshua.
Yeah, and I should point out that I don't have the foggiest idea what I'm going to be writing when I go into this. On a rare occasion, I'll go in with a particular question, but most of the time, whatever happens, happens.
But most of the conversation in that group focused on what is Tao, and you know, people just gave examples of what they thought it was. And then Jim starts out this conversation with not even knowing that it was going to be Yeshua that he was going to be speaking with, just journaling about that meeting. So there you go.
And the journal entry is short. Today's discussion during the Yeshua Shu Chi meeting was lively and most intriguing. The question, what is being in Tao, became the focus, and it was striking how much wisdom was displayed by members of this group. The Chinese story that could aptly be titled "We'll See" perhaps illustrates the attributes of a man who is in Tao. And this was part of my journaling. This is not something that was given by Yeshua or Shu Chi. Once upon a time, this is a well-known story. Once upon a time, there was an old farmer who had worked his crops for many years. One day, his horse ran away. Upon hearing the news, his neighbors came to visit. "Such bad luck," they said sympathetically. "You must be so sad." "We'll see," the farmer replied. The next morning, the horse returned, bringing with it 2 other wild horses. "How wonderful," the neighbors exclaimed. "Not only did your horse return, but you received 2 more. What great fortune you have." We'll see, answered the farmer. The following day, his son tried to ride one of the untamed horses, was thrown, and broke his leg. The neighbors again came to offer their sympathy on his misfortune. Now your son cannot help you with your farming, they said. What terrible luck you have. We'll see, replied the old farmer. The following week, military officials came to the village to conscript young men into the army. Seeing that the son's leg was broken, they passed him by. The neighbors congratulated the farmer on how well things had turned out. Such great news, you must be so happy. The man smiled to himself and said once again, we'll see. So after writing that, then the conversation begins. Good morning, my brother. If you look back through the various conversations and some items of poetry, you will see that this subject has shown up with some frequency. Though Master Shu may be the best at carrying you into experiences of Tao, allow me, if you will, to show you something that may deepen your understanding. Would that be agreeable? Most assuredly. I am happy to continue writing the energies that were set in motion this afternoon. As you are aware, as Master Lao Tzu has stated, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Yet words are somewhat unfairly devalued these days. Like visual art, like music, they may aim one as an arrow toward that consciousness which is peculiar to that great mystery, that great ultimate. When released, that arrow carries our awareness into the core of that consciousness, and we sense, feel, apprehend something at once so transcendent, yet so immanent, so familiar, as to know it as the basis of all that is, including ourselves. Are you following so far? I believe your words here are doing just what you are describing. I am feeling something quite familiar, yet not quite describable. Then, I would like you to join me as we enter the mind of the old farmer in the story. But this is a parable, right? This isn't a description of one particular man's experience. This is a distillation of innumerable experiences, and as such is accessible not just as story, but as the consciousness that it partakes of. The consciousness may be entered, and to begin to do so, we can use the convenience of the image of the old farmer. I see. Sorry to be dense, but I want to orient myself clearly at the outset. As well you should. Now, you've journeyed in consciousness before, so I won't give you a lot of instruction. See if you can, in some sense, become that old farmer and describe this for me. Okay. I am seeing him in the field on a warm day. I can see his horse at some distance. Now I am seeing through his eyes. Let me just get a little acclimated to this. I'm having some trouble because the vision in his right eye is blurry, maybe cloudy. He mostly sees with his left eye. He has a fair amount of pain in his hips and shoulders, and I sense that this is from years of very hard work. Is this okay so far? Keep going. I'm going deeper into his consciousness. The impaired vision and physical pain are at the surface of his awareness. Beneath that is a layer that might be described as an archive of his experiences. I see a very ancient tree, gnarled and shaped and sculpted by the winds and weather, an expression of everything that has shaped and strengthened him, whether joyful or sorrowful. As I see it, I can begin to feel it in the form of undulations of feeling that are varying degrees of pleasant and unpleasant. Then I sink into a substrate of some kind that is a steady flow without the interplay of opposites that lie immediately above it. This consciousness is not evaluating anything as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, joyful or sorrowful. It is simply present to all that is happening above it. This is strange and obviously not of the farmer's time, but the song Old Man River is going through my mind. In any case, this consciousness seems neutral in one sense, in the sense of not being caught up in evaluating. But the experience of being in this awareness has a mild but definite pleasant quality, pleasant without being pleasurable. Let me rest in this for a few moments. Yes, it seems to be a sort of pleasantness that has no opposite. I don't know how to say that it differs from the sort of pleasantness that would eventually give way to unpleasantness. I just can't English that. Perhaps it is a quality of being at peace with what is, no matter how some other region of his mind might react to it. And just lingering in that peace now. It feels like it is joined by a vast field of peace that is pervasive, and that he has gained the ability in the course of his life to live the better part of the time from this level. It has taken him a long time, and he has done a lot of work in the form of reflection, contemplation, and so on. So when he says, "we'll see," it's not idle chatter or even clever commentary. There's actually a hint of pleasant anticipation of what the next moment will bring. And it's of no consequence whether it might be commonly regarded as good or ill fortune. That's about all I can find for now. I take some breaths and return as fully as I can to my own locale, though I can still very much feel the traces of this experience. They have mostly that peaceful pleasantness about them. Yeshua says, "You have experienced that quality that is generally called equanimity, which characterizes the state of being in Tao. Being in Tao is often confused with everything falling into place according to one's desires. Tao cannot be so confined. As the story illustrates, what is falling into place may be the setup for seeming misfortune. Being in Tao is being in wise, non-reactive relation to what is arising, and allowing action, if any, to flow from that source. Unless it is not. See? There may be an instance in which Tao turns such a nice description of itself on its head, yielding behavior that looked crazy and unenlightened. Tao will not be confined, not only by words, but by prescriptions, such as the Prince of Peace turning over the tables, such as that. This has been most intriguing, and I am so appreciative of this further understanding. I am beginning to fade. It's about 3 a.m. now, but can remain alert enough if there is further to be given this morning. There is always more, yet this is a good place to conclude for now. Do realize that your journey into the mind of the farmer is not that far from a journey into self. There comes a time when those layers of consciousness that once defined us give way to, are transformed by, this ever-present but hidden and subtly joyous peace. Abba, may all who seek this peace find those who help them discern its presence within. May they be given the patience and persistence to do the work required to discover this treasure, and living examples of those who have done so that their faith and trust in the process of life may grow. Thank you for your sacred work this morning, dear friend. We shall speak again soon. Thank you, my friend. So that's an example of a Yeshua. It seems like I don't want this to be a rush. I want to share with you one more thing, and we'll stop it for there and maybe take some questions. Another thing that happens is poetry, which flows through pretty much unedited. There are instances where I've gone back, but there's one particular group of poems that have come through that all concern a world that is orbiting around a blue star. I have no idea what this is about or where it came from, but this is one called Elder's Farewell.
Jim has read this before at different presentations, and there are always a few people in the listening audience who connect with this. And I did when I first heard it as well. So let's see what happens here.
See. Yeah. Are they yet waiting for us, gathering under starlit skies that by day are washed by the blue sun? Have they given up hope that ever we may return to turquoise landscapes, to the blue skies and seas? They are now a faint memory, perhaps more legend than fact. Yet in my heart, I know I do not belong to this landscape, to this world circling this yellow orb. Beautiful indeed, but it does not pass for home. The great horns that echo from the mountain monasteries stir the memories of a time on the lost continent where life and ceremony were patterned on the lost world, the blue-tinged world, the ancestral home. The cosmic river on which we launched our canoes can no longer be found. The purpose of our launching can no longer be discerned. Did we achieve our aims? Did we fail? Did we serve a noble cause with honor? Or was our mission beyond our reckoning, guided by a grander agenda than our grandest statements of purpose could conceive? Was our concept but a guiding fiction? We look around us and see this world struggling to be free, yet equipped with instincts guaranteed to mire it in suffering. Have we made a difference? Have we nudged it toward some tipping point that will see its liberation? I lie in the grass at night, sending these questions starward. Some nights I fancy that I catch a glimpse of the river, that the way home has opened, that I will return there and come back here when I have rediscovered my instructions. But then the reverie subsides, the sky returns to random, and I am left with the blind desire in my heart and a mind full of theories and plans with no foundation. Yet I return to this sky each night without fail. It is difficult to live in this place when, unlike the natives, one's life is measured in the tens of thousands of their years. You have to stay on the move. You can't make friends. We are the silent watchers, the witnesses. We are the ones who are supposed to know what is happening, what needs to happen. Or are we? Are we who we think we are? Is it possible we are here to learn from those we serve rather than serve as their salvation? Are we simply fellow students, a gang of kids who happen to live a lot longer than our classmates? I can't pretend that I know anymore. I don't know what knowing would look like. Last night I dreamed that the canoes had all been found. We were gathered at the edge of night on the banks of the great stream. We were hugging and laughing. We were remembering. We set our boats afloat in great joy. We looked back upon our fellows who called the land of the yellow sun home. They had finally figured things out. They were thanking us, wishing us well. They had fallen into the abyss, but had found their wings. It was going to be all right with them. As for us, we were, of course, headed back to the blue land. Were the others awaiting us? Was there a memory of us into which we could insert ourselves upon arriving? Or had we now become the universal strangers? I discovered that night that what I had dreamed was real, and what I had taken for real was the dream. I learned that this is an easy mistake to make, and not to be too upset about it. I also learned that confusion about what is real is a sign that one has become truly familiar with and integrated into humanity. It seems such loss of sanity established our credentials, in a sense. But enough of this for now. We will spend the years of our homeward journey reflecting upon our forgettings and rememberings, and we shall review the course of our efforts to guide the humans homeward. We shall ponder all that we have learned from them. Year by year, the blue sun grows brighter. Soon we shall see it as a disk in the blackness. We are beginning to feel ourselves returning to our true forms. We are quite beautiful in our own skin. We invite you to come visit us. Come in your dreams, your contemplations. When you see a speck or orb of blue in the darkness, this is our beckoning. Do not be afraid. We are your friends. Okay. So, did you want to say anything else?
Just this gives me chills and makes me teary every time I hear it.
Me too.
Just wonder how other people are feeling about it. And any questions for Jim?
Yeah, that's all we have to present.
Yeah. Marilyn, I see your face and it touched you.
Tim, you might want to turn the share screen off.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And I did have, yeah, it really did. But the thing that spoke to me in your talk was, Judith, the minute you said that nurse was like in a zone, because that's exactly what I saw on Derek Chauvin's face when he was pronounced guilty.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew, you might have seen the two paintings I painted last night. I was really,
You did.
yeah. And that was part of my process too. But the minute I saw Derek Chauvin's face, I heard from his soul, wait a minute, that's not right. I did what I was supposed to do. Because we had a contract, and that these actions are what changed the world. And it was a contract between the soul of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin before they got here.
Yeah.
And so that's what I heard in your story as confirmation, because that's such a profound thing, because knowing that's the answer to how to forgive right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Once you know that, you're not viewing it from the limited perspective of earth vision. So thank you. That was so beautiful. And I love the poem and I love everything you said. And I really feel blessed to have been here to hear that. Thank you.
Amen.
Yes.
Mm.
Ditto.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just absorbing it. Just no words.
Mm.
Thank you, Jim. That was really inspiring in many different ways. I mean, with the different styles of writing, different perspectives, you know, sometimes very profound, heartfelt, and then humorous and kind of like wild and imaginative, and then back to lyric poetry. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quite a journey, and it continues. And we feel like now, seriously, we're getting ready to put this together in collections and publish. So we probably will. I'll probably begin to work on that. But any questions for Jim? Stephen, I know. Oh, go ahead. Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. I did want to ask. I know, and I have visited your Thursday groups. And in the meantime, Marilyn Butler is collecting emails of people who are attending this program to so that we can all keep in contact with each other. Are you also open to having more people come? And would you like to either collect some emails or give your email and they'll contact you, or is it more of a closed group?
No, it's not a closed group, and people come in and out of it. And I listed our emails for Marilyn, so they can just contact us. But it's the first and third Thursdays of the month from 4:30 to 6.
Thank you. Lovely. Very moving.